Today we're going to learn of some watercolor techniques. I'm going to show you a lot. The first one is called wet on dry. This is where you take the wet watercolor paint and paint onto the dry paper. It creates crisp lines and is probably a way you've painted a lot. Here are some examples of artists just like you who have created wet on dry. Now there's wet on wet. That's where you take the wet paint and paint onto the wet paper. So first you dampen your paper with clean water. Then you paint onto that water and it explodes and creates this unique, blended, awesome look. You can do lots of really wonderful things with the wet on wet technique. The next technique I want to tell you about is called a wash. A wash is where you paint in a big area. You can do it using wet on wet or wet on dry, but you're just filling in with a lot of paint. Wash is an important technique as it's the way you fill in the background or the different shapes on your paper. Now there are two types of wash. This one is called graded wash. It's where you take your paint and you're going to make it dark on one end and light on the other. You fill it up with paint and then you go back and add water in one area and perhaps even you go back and add more paint to the opposite side to make it dark. It's like a value from light to dark. This is great for different sunsets or this background of the leaves or to show things that are far away. The next kind is called blended wash. Blended wash is where you combine two colors. So you put down your first color, clean your brush, and put down your second color. Then with a clean brush, you mix the two colors together. Blended wash is one of my very favoriteest things to do with paint. Here's one by a famous artist or a fish where the colors are blended together. Now you can create textures with watercolor. The first one I want to tell you about is blot. It's where you take the paint and you're going to blot it away. First you fill up your area with your paint. Then you can take a Kleenex or a Q-tip and take away. This is great to make clouds or blank spaces or even some textures like with this polar bear. The next one is called scraping. You remove the paint before it dries. For this yellow, I tried my best to do a graded wash, dark yellow to light yellow. Then I used the end of my Q-tip and my finger to remove some of the paint. You can create some wonderful textures using scrape. The next one is called dry brush. It gives a scratchy texture. You take your paint on your brush and then you dry your brush off and then paint. This makes it so that the paint is not so liquidy but a bit more scratchy. It's great for trees and grass, and I bet you can think of other things too. The next one, which I'm sure you've done before, is called wax resist. Wax resist is where you first draw with an oil pastel or a crayon and then you paint over with your paint. The wax acts as a barrier and says, "No paint, you may not be here." And so then the wax shows through. It's a great way to create outlines and designs on your paper. The final one I want to tell you about is called a tape resist. All you do is you take some sort of tape, like masking tape or scotch tape, and you push it down, making sure that it's nice and pressed all the way down. Then you go ahead and paint right over the tape. In this tape resist, practice some of my different techniques. Once it's dry then, you go back and remove the tape and you have the blank white spaces. You can leave them blank or you can then paint inside those white spaces. Tape resist is a great way to have different shapes appear like the outside of that bathtub or that sun. Enjoy the different watercolor techniques and try them out in your own painting.